All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Yes, we are back for year 2 of 1UpState. And not only are we back, but we have expanded program offerings. We have a whole host of new games for everyone to enjoy. We have new organizations that are supporting us, and we even have board game play testing over in room 2C. Yes, we have now officially taken over the entire first floor of the Albany Capitol Center. And make no mistake, even going through this exercise for a second time, it is still a monstrous undertaking. And as with last year, I was definitely not alone. Therefore, and once again, I have a few thank yous and shout outs to make. To the Tech Valley Game Space, specifically Jamie Stevenson and Chris Spahn for your continued support and guidance. To Corey Aldrich of ACE for continuing to believe in this event and its mission. To Lily McAvoy for coordinating the social media postings. To Richard Lynn and Paige Franchek of Agora Media for once again foolishly accepting to help us out with the organization and program design. To Andrew Buginis for recording the speaker sessions today. And of course, the entire staff of the Albany Capitol Center for letting us party here today. And I have one final thanks to make. These events not only require huge amounts of administrative efforts, they also require so much more. It is with great pleasure and honor that I give thanks to WB Games New York for providing support as a presenting sponsor for 1UpState 2024. Their support helps ensure that events like this are able to continue and grow into the future. And with that, it is my distinct privilege to welcome to the stage executive producer at WB Games New York, Elliot Haase, to give a few words and introduce today's keynote speaker. Elliot, if you will.
Hey everyone, that was a way better intro than I was going to give. I'm Elliot Haase, executive producer at WB Games New York. We are super proud to be the presenting sponsor for the 1UpState Expo. I wasn't able to be here last year, but I only heard amazing things about it, and I could already see sort of the future of this event, keeping it growing, keeping it prospering, and that's what we're super excited to be a part of. We're not only proud to be a sponsor, but we're proud to be a part of the Capital Region gaming community because it is pretty darn impressive. The hub of different teams and groups and communities we have, from students at our technical schools getting an introduction to the games industry for the first time, to upstart independent teams who are working to launch their first game, to many big established groups like WB Games New York who have been in the industry for over a couple of decades. We have an amazing hub here in the Capital Region. It's amazing to be a part of an event that sort of helps cultivate that. So it's super exciting, right? So there's a ton of exhibitors out there. You guys have probably already seen those tables. Please spend a lot of time networking. This is a really good networking opportunity. I've already shaken a lot of hands of young people. I love doing that when I come to these events. So please take advantage of every table out there. And obviously, the thing that I'm here to talk about and give an intro to is our presentation and our panels. There's a lot of, just a wide-ranging of really good topics today across the board, and that's why it's my distinct pleasure to give you an intro to our first one. Someone who has an amazing amount of experience helping teams, helping independent teams getting their start. Obviously, a ton of experience with his team at Execution Labs, and is going to tell you a little bit about publishing as an independent studio. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jason Della Rocca.
Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. Well, so great to be back. I've been in the area a few times, doing some work with CEG and RPI, and speaking to students, and involved in some of the initiatives a little bit before COVID and a little bit after COVID. So always great to be back. As Elliot hinted, I am old and I've been around a while. I'm almost for 30 years in games, so I've been in the industry for longer than many of you have been alive. I do tend to talk about the business side of games quite a bit, and so I like to give a little warning ahead of most of my talks that we are going to be talking about money and business and funding and pitching and all this kind of stuff. And that's not because I don't respect the kind of culture and art of games, I think games are a very exciting, very powerful medium. And if you're just working on games because you love it and it's your passion, it's a hobby, that's fantastic. But we're here, or at least I'm here, to make money as well, to do amazing games, but amazing games that can also generate revenue and a livelihood and pay your staff. And in that regard, the game industry, it's been a bit of a bloodbath over the past year and a half, with a lot of folks getting laid off, projects being canceled, publishers shutting down, limited access to funds, etc. And so this presentation today is going to be talking a little bit about that sort of shift that's been going on, and also how independent developers, independent studios can start to not only survive but thrive in the current context. So this was an interesting post. I guess the font is a bit small. A post on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, actually was just before GDC, the Game Developers Conference, that's held down in San Francisco every March. And it's this pair of developers who are the co-founders of a studio from the Netherlands. And they were doing a bit of a Hail Mary post on LinkedIn saying, we're going to GDC, we're trying to get funding, we're pitching our projects, and if we don't get a project signed, we're out of business. And they were kind of lamenting how difficult it's been, that they, over the past 2 years, over the past 2 years, they were pitching 5 different games, over 200 pitch meetings, and they weren't able to get a game signed. And what's interesting is this team is an experienced team. They've been in the industry for 10 years. They've had some success. Their games, Deliver Us the Moon and Deliver Us Mars. Their latest one, over 7,000 reviews, so estimated sort of 6 million revenue. They've worked with publishers before. So this is not like, 2 kids out of school, their first go with no pedigree, no history, no track record, and yet, they were having a real tough time landing a deal. The post kind of worked for them in that at GDC they had their schedule was full. They had nonstop meetings. Everyone shared this post and kind of supported their cause. Sadly, a few weeks after, they said, we didn't end up getting a deal, and so they shut down the studio. So it's kind of a bit of that bloodbath reality that we're talking about. Part of that reality is that publishers sign less than 1% of the games that they see. In fact, it's a fraction of a percent. So for every 1,000 games that a publisher comes into contact with, less than about a quarter get a follow-up meeting. Only less than 100 out of the 1,000, less than 10% do they actually play your demo or your prototype. And then again, barely a percent goes into due diligence where they're really digging in, and then from there they'll sign a game or 2 out of every 1,000. Now this is sort of anecdotal numbers. I mean, I know a lot of publishers. Before I put the presentation together, I kind of emailed a bunch of them and said, give me a sense of what your deal flow pipeline looks like in terms of numbers. And these were kind of an aggregation of the numbers, and pretty much everyone looked about the same. That for every 1,000, they're signing a game or 2. So it's pretty rough reality, and this is over the past 5 years. So not just specifically 2024, which again we all know has been a tough year. So that sort of is bringing about what I'm calling the new era of evidence-based investing, which has kind of always been the same sort of paradox that we've been, or challenge we've been dealing with, in that you need evidence to get funding, you need funding to get evidence. And this is a transition from, maybe 10 years ago, where you can replace the word evidence with prototype, right? You needed a prototype to get funding, but you needed funding to make the prototype. So we've moved way beyond that. Now, if you don't have a prototype or a playable build, forget about it. Now they want to see traction. They want to see evidence. What I mean by that, they want to see that you already put a trailer up and that it has 1 million views, that you already built a Steam page, coming soon page, and you've got 50,000 wish lists, that you've already built your Discord and you've got 5,000 Discord members. So they want to see evidence that people are interested in your game or think your game is cool. So when I was emailing the publishers about the numbers and their pipeline, I also asked them how does evidence or traction affect your decisions in terms of what you back? And so these are a few anonymous copy pastes from those email exchanges. So this is an example of one. So on the question of evidence, one response was, this is factored in hugely at the executive level. was way easier to get them to agree to a game with a 500,000 budget if there was existing wish list traction, especially. This is like coming out of the mouth of a publisher. And similarly, again, on evidence, yes, it definitely factors in anything beyond the demo and concept that increases the chance of the game being successful, including numbers like wishlist, Discord subs, Twitter followers, trailer views, crowdfunding, press coverage, etc. And so, and it sort of goes on and on and on. This is sort of fairly pretty typical response from publishers these days. And so, from a business priority, right? If you are trying to build a studio as a business and pay yourself and pay your staff, a business priority becomes speed to evidence. So it's not just about doing the code or getting the art nice, but you have to be thinking about this question of evidence. And for me, the conclusion here is that you need to presumptively self-publish. You have to assume as a developer that the publishers are not going to save you. That you, from the very beginning, have to assume that you are going to publish your game yourself. And essentially, it's a concept I'm calling inception publishing, which is you need to start self-publishing your game to generate the evidence that your game is publishable to convince publishers to publish it, or just self-publish. So it's kind of a weird, cruel world out there in that developers can no longer just be developers. You now also have to be your own publisher, even in the end, whether you self-publish ultimately or because you did those things, generated the evidence that now a publisher wants you. So you're kind of presumptively self-publishing in that sense. And so what happens is, developers don't want to accept that truth. They go out and they pitch. They go to a bunch of meetings. They try to, they go to a GDC or a PAX or a Gamescom or whatever, and they try to get in front of publishers and investors to pitch them their game. And most often, you get these kinds of responses, which is some version of the not a no, not a yes. You get things like, it's nice, I like the demo, but you're too early, or come back later when you've made more progress, or I like the direction you're going in, but not enough traction. Right? It's this kind of, again, not the no, but not a yes. And really, even though they won't say it, what they really mean is what you've presented still appears to be too risky. For whatever reason, in their mind, the team is inexperienced. There's no traction. You don't have wish list. Whatever. It just means that it's too risky at that point when you pitch to them. And so this kind of made me think about how evidence affects the perception of risk. And this is sort of the FOMO versus risk crossover. FOMO, of course, meaning a fear of missing out. So on the bottom, imagine this is a graph where over time or as you get more evidence or traction, risk goes down. So as you get more wish lists, more trailer views, more subs to your Discord, et cetera, risk, or perceived risk anyways, starts to decrease. Because you're building evidence, you're building traction. And as you do that, FOMO increases. So as you're getting more trailers and you're in more festivals and your wish lists go up and you're on the Steam trending list and all this kind of stuff, all of a sudden the people with money, they have this fear of missing out. It's like, if we don't do a deal, someone else will grab that game or that team. And so if you're sort of over here and you haven't built enough evidence, then it's just too early. If you're down here, that means you haven't created enough buzz yet. Or if you're up there, maybe it's still too risky. That even though you've built some evidence, maybe you're a solo developer and you're trying to build the next World of Warcraft. So no matter how many wish lists you have, it still is too risky of a project. And so the magical zone is over here. This is the deal zone. That once you've created enough evidence, decrease the perceived risk, increase the FOMO, then deals are going to happen. Now, unfortunately, this is a conceptual graph. I cannot tell you exactly where that magical crossover point is. That if you have 5,122 wish lists, boom, you're in the deal zone. But essentially, what it means is, if deals are not happening, if you're pitching and no one's really biting, conceptually, it means you are not in the deal zone, which means you have not generated enough evidence, you have not decreased the perceived risk, and there's no buzz or no FOMO on what you're presenting. So I think, again, even though it's not measurable, it's still an important concept to understand whether or not you're in the, quote unquote deal zone. All right, so I keep saying this word evidence or traction, and really what does this mean? And in short, it is the difference between what you are promising versus what has been proven. And developers don't tend to make promises. You don't go into a pitch meeting and say, hey, developer, a publisher, I promise you, A, B, and C. But in fact, we are making promises. We're promising that the game's going to be awesome, that the game will sell a whole bunch, that the game's going to get great reviews and everyone's going to love it, that I can actually make the game that I'm pitching, that I can make it on time and more or less on budget. So again, no developer goes into a meeting and say, here's the list of my promises, but ultimately that is what you're doing. You're pitching your game and you're kind of promising that you're going to pull it off. It's going to be an amazing game. Everyone's going to love it. It's going to sell a whole bunch. And so of course you better give me the money and let's do a deal. And so is there evidence that what you are promising will become true? I kind of joke. I said when I get a solo developer coming in saying they're going to make the next World of Warcraft, okay, there's no evidence that you're actually going to pull it off. That's a promise that you can't necessarily deliver. But obviously, we're not all trying to do that. We're trying to be a bit more reasonable. But so when I think about evidence or traction, I kind of broke it down along these 7 vectors. I have a whole other lecture just on evidence that if you kind of punch my name into YouTube, it'll come up. So I'll only very briefly talk about it. But the first one, zeitgeist, is just like, are you doing something that's kind of trending? Are you, if Viking games are selling well, are you also making a Viking game? And it's kind of all publishers are looking for their own Viking game, and so you're just kind of in the zeitgeist. Team and pedigree, well, this one's kind of obvious. Is do you have a track record as a studio? What have you shipped? What have you worked on? How has that performed? If you've already shipped 3 first-person shooter games and now you're pitching your 4th, the fact that you've shipped 3 others is pretty strong evidence that you know how to build and ship a first-person shooter. Production progress, so this is the status of your build. How fun is the build? How good does it look? How stable is it? If a publisher says, game sounds cool, send me a build, are you able to send them a build and can they play it and is it enjoyable to them? Also, have you de-risked some of the innovative elements? If you're saying that you're building a 50-person or a 25v25 battle royale, is the online working? Right? If the online component is not working yet, that's not good progress. You have to sort of de-risk some of those elements. The trickier stuff now is starting to get into things like social proof and community validation. Social proof is things like wish lists and trailer views. And when you make a Twitter post of a concept art, are you getting a whole bunch of likes and shares and so on? So it's all sort of that external validation that when you're posting stuff and showing stuff, that people are liking it and sharing with it. And then in terms of community engagement or community validation, now are they joining your Discord? Are they signing up for the play test? Are they spending 2 hours in the game, in the demo, and then giving you feedback on how to improve the UI, this kind of stuff? Are they really engaging with it? And then finally, things like funnel metrics and financials. Now this is usually once the game is actually out. How much does it cost to acquire a user? If you're doing Facebook ads or Google ads, what's the ratio between how much ads you have to buy versus how much they spend in the game? And when the game is actually out, then is it profitable? And all this kind of stuff. As developers, historically, we've been focused on the first 3 things. Right? Let's work on a game we think is kind of cool. Let's put a good team together where we have some skills and some good pedigree, and let's focus on the build. All of our effort is on building the game. Whereas now, this kind of shift to evidence-based investing means that, again, you have to presumptively self-publish and start putting out the trailers and the Steam page to get wish lists, all that kind of stuff, running play tests, building a Discord, building a community. And so the next 2, the number 4 and number 5, now is also falling on the shoulders of developers, and you have to be thinking and doing these things from the very start. And then the last 2, these are more kind of later stage. Maybe you've already shipped a few games, now you're looking for larger investment and so on. Well, then those investors are going to start really looking at profitability and what's your burn rates and what are your funnel metrics or all this kind of stuff look like. So, but critically, the whole idea of now you are presumptively self-publishing. It's the first 5 things that as developers you need to be focusing on. There was a nice article a few months ago on Game Industry Biz about this very topic, and there was an investor, Spike Lorry from Hero Capital, which is an investment fund, and kind of he has a nice quote here I'm going to read out as a summary of some of what we've been talking about. And so he says, the bar is super high right now. Before, a great game plus a great team used to cut it, meaning to get funding. You could walk out and get a couple of $1 million from a West Coast venture capital fund pretty easily with that. Now it's all about how are you validating this? What can you show me? Have you made a trailer? Do you have a Discord community that really loves the concept? Are you using companies to play test so you can validate and get real feedback? There's a lot more scrutiny. There has always been scrutiny. There's just a lot more. So again, it was never easy to get money, but kind of this point here where it's like, yeah, before, great team, great idea, come in, we do the deal, whereas now they want to see all that, quote unquote, evidence. So let's look at kind of an overview of funding. And I've done a lot of lectures on funding. Again, if you punch my name into YouTube or the GDC Vault, you'll see some of my older lectures on funding. One of the big things I talk about with funding is the difference between project funding and company-based funding. And so I call that the funding fork. And the sort of shortcut is, if you are working primarily on PC console premium games, then you're in the project funding side of the fork. If you're building a studio that's doing highly scalable multiplayer online game as a service, free to play, then you're down the company or venture side of the fork. So it's really determined by your business model. And if you're not, the good thing is you don't have to waste your time chasing funding on the other side of the fork. So if I'm doing, Steam $20 roguelike, I go down project funding, I can completely ignore the company side, the VC funds, the angels, all that kind of stuff. It's a complete waste of time, but it allows me to focus on my game and project funding sources. Likewise, if I'm doing, that MMO or whatever, then I go down the company side. I don't waste my time on the project side. But it's a more complex topic that I encourage you to check out my other lectures. But all right, so on the project funding side, I also talk about the different sources of funding relative to timing. And so this, very crude diagram, imagine this is a typical production pipeline where we start with a short conceptualization phase, we move into prototyping and pre-production. We have production, which in theory should be should be going off the screen, but a longer production phase with alpha and beta at the end, and then post-production or post-launch. And typically, in these earlier phases, concept and pre-prod, this is where it's kind of like self-funding, right? Maybe you have a day job and you're doing this on the weekend with your friends, or maybe you're a studio that's doing some service work and you're investing your own profits into the effort, or maybe it's love money. Your spouse is letting you not have a job and work on your dream while they pay the rent, or maybe your uncle is rich and gave you a loan or something. You never know. But usually these are relatively smaller amounts of funds that are able to support you when it's just you, maybe one or two other team members, and you're in those initial phases. Publishers tend to want to invest later in pre-production or early in production. That's kind of their sweet spot. And the reason is, well, one, you have to have enough of a build, enough of a prototype to put in their hands. In most cases, publishers will not sign deals unless they can actually play a version of your game. So the idea is that, well, we only have a really viable version of the game until, once we're sort of midway through pre-production. And then also, they don't like to come in too late in production, in part because they have work to do. They have to coordinate the porting, localization, they have to come up with a marketing strategy, they have to start doing the influencer campaign, they have to do all that stuff. And so if you show up with the game ready to publish tomorrow, like they don't have time to do their job. So they like to come in early, and also they like to give feedback, as you make the game. So that's kind of the sweet spot for publishers. Things like crowdfunding, Kickstarter, come later and later in production. When Kickstarter kind of first started, you did see things that were pitched at the concept phase. But now it's way, way later that enough Kickstarter backers got burned by projects that didn't finish, and so there's a lot more skepticism. They want to know that their money sort of guarantees that the game will get done and get made. And so Kickstarter is viable, but not really viable to start a project. Kickstarter these days are kind of used in that sort of mid to ending phases. Nice to do it if you pull it off, but it doesn't really help you get the project started. Pre-sales, so if you're doing early access sales, like Minecraft famously, sold for millions of dollars while it was still in alpha. So you still have some of those examples, but it's definitely not a guarantee that you'll get those sales or enough sales you need to keep funding production. And then you also have things like prizes or contests. This I say is more of a bonus. So if you go to GDC and there's the Indie Game Festival, the grand prize, I believe, is $30,000. So, great if you go to an event and you pitch or you're part of the competition, you come home with a $20,000, $30,000 check. But I wouldn't necessarily plan my budget going around the world to win festivals. But again, nice bonus to have. Anyway, so that's some of the kind of typical sources of funding and kind of their sweet spot, depending where you are in terms of the life cycle of the project itself. And then there's another one that doesn't really apply because we're in the US. But for example, I'm from Canada, and there's also government grants and government support. And so depending where you are in the world, there may be access to different forms of governmental support. So if we look at that pipeline relative to the concept of evidence-based investing, okay, well then we're starting to ask the question, what evidence do I need along that pipeline? And so it would start with things like Twitter reactions. So even at the earliest phases, when I'm concepting my game, maybe I'm putting some concept art or two different versions of character styles, and I'm posting that to Twitter and getting some initial feedback from my potential audience. And then at the earliest phase of pre-production, I'm already doing my announcement trailer. That this is the next game or the game that I'm working on, and starting to collect trailer views and getting it to spread. Now, for the developers out there, you're saying, oh geez, oh my God, I can't imagine creating a sexy enough trailer that early in production. And so there is some element of reorienting how you produce your games and build your prototypes that, for better or worse, it's like you have to be ready to show it off much earlier and create a cool enough or sexy enough gameplay trailer in the very earliest phases of production. Why? Because you have to start generating evidence as early as possible. And when you do that, then you also create your Steam Coming Soon page. And so from that point forward, you're starting to collect wish lists. So as early as pre-production, just getting out of conceptualization, I've already got my Steam page up. I've already got a gameplay trailer up, collecting views and collecting wish lists. And then I start doing social media. Right, I start posting on Twitter and doing TikToks and all that kind of stuff, doing the social media hustle, and the CTA or the call to action is come play the early build of the game. So this is usually my advice: is the call to action is not to go wish list. The call to action is to come join the community and play the game, and that does two things. One, it builds your Discord, it builds your community, and once they're part of the community, then you can go tell them to wish list and like your post and do whatever else. But it also helps you make a better game. Right? If you're actually inviting players in to play early builds of the game, this is a way to actually make the game a better balanced, better built game. So it's not only a marketing thing, but it's also a production assistance. And so as I was saying, you're running playtests at that point. And you're also looking at things like average playtime. So as you're building the game, one really important metric is how long do players stay in the game, even at those earliest phases. And if they come in and they bounce out in 5 minutes, there's a problem either with your UI, your tutorial, your first level, it's too hard, whatever. But you have to know that as early as possible. This is part of making a better game. And then that means you've got Discord engagement because you've been inviting everyone to the Discord. They're playing the build. They're giving feedback on bugs and issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're building a lively community. Then now maybe mid-production, you have confidence of when you're going to ship it. So you do the launch date trailer. Maybe then you actually make the public demo available, and so that's driving additional engagement via Steam. And then also you're going to have streamer engagement at that point that the demo's up. People realize, what's this new demo that everyone's playing? And the streamers start to play it on Twitch, and then people start to see it, and they start to wish list it, then they join the community and all this kind of stuff. So this is not necessarily like do this and everything is solved. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what I mean by evidence creation and what self-publishing could look like. And so, we're not just coding the game, we're also doing all this other stuff in parallel in order to build evidence, traction, momentum, and audience. All right, so some glimpses of how this has happened in the past, just to kind of inspire us a little bit. There's a game called Memento that used a TikTok teaser to kind of test their concept and to before they moved forward into full production. There's a nice article at howtomarketagame.com where they talked about this game. And so the developer, very small developer, I think there were only like two people, 3 people, said their TikTok post overnight, it earned 300,000 views and has since gone on to earn 1.1 million views. That was all the validation they needed to move on to full production. So again, this idea of like early validation, they had a concept, they built just enough of that concept in order to create a good TikTok post. That post went viral, and they're like, okay, well, there's definitely clear interest in what we're doing, and so now they moved into full production. All right, another one, a studio called Stoke. Earlier this year, so kind of 2024, still during the bloodbath, they raised $5.5 million for their indie shooter. And here, Jasper, one of their investors from Bitcraft, they said, it is rare to observe velocity in playtests to find convincing validation for main assumptions only a few months into development. The team is methodical in identifying and validating large-scale opportunities alongside early community building. They even received their first community-created map submission in less than 9 months. So again, this concept of speed to validation, early engagement, using playtests to validate and build community, and there they raised $5.5 million. Another one, Proxima, a studio called Proxima. They had an investor, London Venture Partners, and he had this to say, in this environment, those companies that remain lean and validate from users or the market early and often are best placed to achieve this. It gives them more chances to learn, adjust their production, and find the hit thereafter. With our portfolio, we've seen Proxima, a small team of 5 people experimenting with AI gameplay, release multiple prototypes and games in quick succession, going viral with their latest game, Suck Up. So they had done, a bunch of rapid prototypes. They posted those, publicly. Nothing really stuck. And then the 5th one, this one, Suck Up, ended up sort of catching a lot of interest. And so now they divert their efforts and resources to that game. And then earlier this summer, there was a game called Murky Divers. Murky Divers is a very similar game to Lethal Company and Content Warning. Just kind of like that, but underwater. A very small team, only a handful of folks. I think they worked on it for less than 2 months. They announced the game at the end of May. 3 weeks later, they launched the game with 70,000 wish lists. Month 1 sales was 100,000 units. And actually, I need to update the slide. Month 3 sales was 250,000 units. So for less than 3 or 4 months of production, handful of devs, and a big success. And then Simon, who runs the Game Developer Expo website, did a little article on it and kind of had this to say. And to be clear, the takeaway here isn't just follow a massive game like Lethal Company and Content Warning, so much as understand where big pockets of audience are and how to reach them. And a lot of this is down to game design and setting choices, which will enable virality. Because it just doesn't matter how good your game is if you can't expand its reach somehow. And so in that sense, I often talk about this idea of like hope is not a valid business model. I think too many developers who just have not been exposed to the business side of things, have not been given marketing training or any business training in school, or on their own are just not interested in those kinds of things and are focused on the art, design, music, all the fun and cool stuff, they tend to just hope things will work out. Well, we'll just make our game, throw it up on Steam, and we'll just hope for the best. And that's fine if you're like a hobbyist or you've got a day job and you're not trying to build this as your career. But hope is not a valid business model. And so I often talk about this idea of engineering your success and really sort of being much more deliberate and intentional about business and marketing decisions. And so that does require, first step, to adopt an entrepreneurial mindset. That even if you're just a programmer or just an artist or just a designer, if you're going into this, building a studio, creating a company, and taking a stab at this, then don't just hope for the best. Actually embrace the challenge. And the first thing I often challenge founders is to discuss amongst themselves, what does success mean to you? And it's fine if it's, we just want to make cool games that generate enough money so we can make the next cool game, kind of more of a lifestyle, sustaining studio. That's fine. But it's also okay to say, well, I want to be the next Zynga and generate $1 billion. And any answer in between those two things is also fine. But it's worthwhile to know what the answer is for you and that it's the same as who you're starting the studio with. Because if I want to just make cool games and sort of sustain for the next one, and my co-founder wants to be the next $1 billion Zynga, we're going to have a lot of trouble, a lot of conflict. So you want to make sure that you're going into this adventure with a sense that you're both kind of going in the same direction. That the definition of success is relatively the same for whoever you're on this adventure with. Again, no right or wrong answer. Just know what the answer is for you. But then, if you have that definition of success, then you can create a plan that actually enables you to achieve that level of success. If you want to be the next Zynga and be rich and billionaires, but you're going to go make puzzle platformers, which is a genre that's not selling well these days, well, there's a complete disconnect from what you're going to do versus what your dreams are. So, you have to think about what actually will enable that level of success. And that means that you have to do some amount of market and competitive analysis to know that, hold on a second, puzzle platforms are not selling these days. So maybe our dream of making $1 billion is not going to become a reality. And you have to do all this concept validation stuff that we were talking about earlier to make sure that your guesses of what might be successful, actually does have a chance of being successful. This is the tricky part. You kind of have to bootstrap the initial phases, self-fund, get grants, depending where you are, friends and family, because there's not a lot of resources out there for those initial phases. When you're doing the very first steps, conceptualization, pre-production, prototyping, trying to generate the initial buzz around the game, it's like no one wants to bite at that point. They're just going to wait for you to do it on your own, against all odds. Some of us are lucky. We have that rich uncle that maybe sponsors us or supports us. If you're up in Canada, maybe you get a grant that kind of helps you in that phase. But that definitely, at this point of reality in industry, is the hardest part. Maybe there's an incubator. It sort of depends on where you are, what city you're in. But that's definitely the hardest phase, the bootstrap phase. And then once you're kind of able to get that booted up, then you're building your game and community at the same time. And essentially, you are presumptively self-publishing now. Right, you're putting up the trailer, the Steam page goes up, you're collecting wish lists, you're doing social media, all the things we talked about before, and that generates evidence. And then that evidence is what opens the door to the real funding opportunities, whether that is a publisher, Kickstarter, getting a Game Pass deal with Xbox, VCs, getting invites to showcases and festivals. Once that momentum gets going, once that buzz gets going, then all of a sudden everybody wants to work with you, everybody wants to throw money at you, everyone wants you, at their festival or showcase, etc. And then, of course, then that's when success happens. So obviously, this is a very tip of the iceberg with a million other challenges and hurdles and things that go on underneath the water. But those are some really critical steps as you embark on the journey. And sort of me identifying number 4 as kind of the real sort of challenging spot as the industry exists today. I think within the next couple of years, we might see a transition where you'll have funding sources specifically for that bootstrap phase. But that's sort of like, we're in the midst of that right now. All right, so the reality is that most developers plan to make a game, not sell a game. And so this is a big part of what I've been trying to evangelize, is you cannot just think of making the game, you have to think about all those other parts. Presumptively self-publishing forces oh crap, we actually have to sell this thing mindset from the start. And even if you're just a team of programmers and artists and designers and you've never done anything about business, listen, you were not born a programmer. You all learned how to be an artist and to animate. There's no voodoo, unknowable magic about marketing and business. This is all stuff that can be learned. So you have to embrace that mindset. This gets the evidence generating process revved up from the start. And again, whether you actually decide to self-publish or ultimately take a deal, now it puts you in the driver's seat. And then just to close up, a few good resources I want to highlight for those who potentially are not aware of them. And I've mentioned at least the first two. Game Discover Co. is a website and agency focused on the marketing and discoverability side of things. They have a free weekly newsletter, and I encourage all of you to sign up for that free newsletter. You'll get a ton of really valuable info on the marketing and business side of things. HowToMarketAGame.com is another great resource. Chris Zukowski in the photo there is a bit of a Steam whisperer. And he writes often about indie developers and how they've kind of cracked the code to find success. And then more on the venture side, which we haven't really talked much about today, is a website called Elite Game Developers that was started by an angel investor and former studio executive, and does a lot of articles and resources about starting a studio and things related to startup funding and so on. And then a book reference, this book, Up, Down, Up, The Journey of a Successful Game Company by Kim Nordstrom, was released earlier this year, and a very rare business book for the game industry, where Kim, a former studio exec, did a bunch of interviews with other studio founders and indies and startups, and what they did to kind of achieve success. All right, so I think that the main takeaway from this session, and I'm probably scared a bunch of you, is evidence, right? I can't just do my thing and hope for the best. I actually have to go get evidence from players, from the market, in what I'm doing. If I have any real hope of turning this into a viable, sustainable business. And I think in the near future, despite the kind of rough patch we're in now, if developers shift their mindset to this presumptively self-publishing and generating evidence from the very beginning, none of us are going to have to pitch anymore, but rather it's going to be the investors and the publishers and the platforms are going to come to us, and they're going to be pitching and begging us to be on their platforms and their labels and so on. All right, thank you very much. We do have time for questions, and because they're recording, if you don't mind, you can come sort of use the microphone, unless okay. Yeah, so just don't be shy. Come on up. No question's a bad question. Happy to dig in. All right, go ahead.
All right, so I noticed that when you did the chart of FOMO versus perceived risk, that roughly followed a economic chart of supply and demand. In your vectors of evidence for successful games, would you care to discuss any other economic principles that indie publishers should follow?
That indie publishers should follow? Yeah, I mean, that would actually be a fun lecture to do unto itself. Yeah, I mean, it's on the spot. I'm not thinking of any other funky, diagrams to sketch up. But there's definitely a supply and demand aspect of things, and a lot of publishers are not particularly perceptive of what the market wants, and so. I mean, if I wanted to be very pessimistic and sort of jaded, I would say that the reason why publishers want to see all this evidence is because they have no confidence in their own ability to make choices, right? So rather than me saying, oh, I like what you're doing, I know that that's going to hit and be great, let's do a deal. It's like I'm saying, I have no clue what's going to work. Show me that you have 100,000 wish lists, and that tells me, oh, now I'm safe to do a deal. And so I know it's not quite answering your question, but there's definitely an effect there that the more evidence you can generate, the easier it is you're letting the publisher sort of be lazy in the choices they're making. So I don't know. I mean, I'll stop there because I don't think I have a good answer to you.
I mean, that was pretty much the answer I was looking for. So I only had one other question, which was, you mentioned place testing player playtime. Could you speak a bit on expanding that playtime to avoid losing money to refund policies? I know that a lot of indie developers have issues with Steam's refund policy because if your playtime doesn't hit that metric, it can get refunded and you lose all the money.
Yeah. So there's kind of two pieces there. One is the Steam policy that if a player has played the game less than 2 hours, they can refund the game, no questions asked. And so then as a developer, you want to ensure that your total playtime is more than 2 hours. So that, you know, if you're just doing this like little poetic narrative experience and the person plays for an hour, it's like, well, I paid $20 for that, refund. There's a whole separate issue there, which is not just the refund, which I think even for short games is still sort of, you know, I don't know, 15%, which is not bad. The short playtime issue is more an issue with regards to Twitch, in that if I'm watching my favorite streamer and they play your game and it's done from start to finish in like an hour, 2 hours, even 5 hours, there's very little motivation for me to go buy your game and just replay the exact same thing that I just watched from start to finish. It's almost as if I've watched the movie, and why would I now go pay to rewatch the movie? So that, I would say, is my much greater concern is short playtime relative to the effect of Twitch than I am necessarily about the refund policy. But that is a whole other topic. Let's call it the total playtime topic, is different than the per session engagement, which is what I mentioned from a playtest point of view. So now imagine I'm doing a roguelike game where essentially, I don't know, maybe a run takes 3-4 hours, but you know, to complete the whole thing maybe takes 20-30 hours. So I don't have a total playtime issue. But when I run my first playtest, like people come in, they play 5 minutes and drop. And maybe it's because like my UI is so crappy, they have no idea like how to build their card deck or whatever. So they go, oh, screw this, they leave. And as a developer, I have to investigate, well, why is everyone dropping in 5 minutes? Oh, it's the deck building UI is busted. Okay, let's go fix that so they understand the flow better. And once I fix that, now the average playtime is 45 minutes because, oh, they get past the first hurdle and they have a few combat. Okay, so that's now more reassuring. So the kind of session-to-session engagement time becomes more of a polish and balancing and player flow issue than it is worrying about, is my whole game long enough and will it kind of get poisoned by the effect of Twitch viewership. So two very important topics, but kind of different topics. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, can you just go up to the mic? Yeah, because they're recording on the video, so they'll be able to capture your question.
Okay, so if publishers can't get you off the ground, then what's the point of them, almost? If you're willing to take care of like the porting and whatnot, is there any benefit to not just self-publishing at that point?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of self-publishing because if you've gone through the whole effort of validating and building up your community, and you know, then just kind of keep it going. Publishers still, I mean, they still know more about that than you do. Like they have a relationship with all the platforms. They probably have a press list. They probably already have a bunch of streamers that they've worked with in the past. That sort of speeds up the process of working with influencer. So they have a team that have done marketing and sales and PR for years, whereas you don't have that experience. So you're still kind of learning on the job, whereas they've done it before. So in theory, can do it better than you, maybe. But the other thing oftentimes is the funding. So maybe you were able to bootstrap with a loan from your uncle to get the prototype built and put up the trailer and get a bunch of views and wish lists, but you still need 500,000 more to hire the rest of the team members to build the full game. And so then it's like, well, listen, my uncle helped me with 10,000 of boot up money, but my uncle's not going to give me $500,000 to do all of the rest. So sometimes you're sort of still reliant on publishers as a source of the larger chunks of funding. But that may or may not be your case. So.
All right, but if you don't, for example, if you don't have a team and it's just you working on it, you don't need that much, all that much money. So.
Yeah, then self-publish and focus on building a community. Because as the community grows, then as you release your next game and next game and next game, you're building your own kind of fan base and audience. And the reality is, if you're just a solo dev working on a small game, it's unlikely you're going to be one of the 1,000 that they're going to sign anyways. So you can kind of save all your time, not worry about chasing and hustling publishers, and just focus on your game and building up your fan base and engaging your community.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go on up if you had your hand up. Yeah, just so.
So I know some games have some companies limit how much this Twitch streamer can play.
Oh, yeah.
How does that does that actually work?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the one that manages the Twitch campaigns. I've seen in some cases where studios will not even send their game or keys to the streamers because of this reason, so they try to avoid Twitch altogether until launch. Or they'll send a build of the game that's maybe only the first, half an hour, just to give a flavor of the game to avoid this issue. But once your game is released and available on Steam, nothing's stopping anybody from just buying it and playing it on Twitch, and at that point you've lost control. So the key is make a game that's longer and ideally make a game that's much more replayable or has emergent systems where when I watch a streamer play and they make certain choices, it motivates me to play myself and make different choices, and those choices will have different outcomes. So that watching you play on Twitch doesn't sort of ruin the experience. That's, I would say, from a developer point of view, much more the design challenge than worrying about, do I not send them a key or do I limit their play time? I think that's a losing proposition from the get-go.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll do one more question, and then we'll break for lunch.
Fantastic. I loved all the insights. It's been really great just listening to this. I guess this is a good question maybe ended on is, have you ever seen a studio or a solo developer that is your golden standard? That you're like, guys, be like this person, this group?
Oof. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of examples. I mean, one that I really like are out of Sweden called Landfall. They're the ones that did Lethal Company. Not Lethal Company. Content Warning. And they're originally the creators of Tabs, the totally accurate battle simulator. But they're so fan-focused. They self-publish all their stuff. They're very community-driven. I think they're a great example. I mean, Murky Divers, the more recent one, just sort of fast to market. They knew exactly who they were going for. Were able to turn things around, very very quickly. I mean, you have Kit Fox is a studio actually out of Montreal, where I'm from. They self-publish everything, and they're very much focused on their fan base, and all the games that they do kind of follow a similar thematic thread, and so they kind of roll their fan base from one game to the next. There's still a lot of good examples out there, and Game Discover Co. and howtomarketagame.com, they will often do these kind of case studies of here's a 3-person indie studio in the middle of nowhere that, against all odds, here's what they did and how they, broke through the noise and had some success and stuff stuff like that. So I would encourage you to kind of go through there and go through their backlogs, and they'll have a bunch of case studies and stuff like that. Cool. All right, folks, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the show. I think Anthony has to come up.